So welcome everyone to episode 3 of our Luminaries series. Today we have Marc Prensky, who has been working with me on some of my work as well. The Atom publication I now call Third Millennium Economics. A lot of that was due to his ideas and him helping me along with that. He has a book on a related subject, related title, Third Millennium Kids, and we are going to talk about that in this episode over here right now. So welcome, Marc. Great to have you.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be a luminary. Here is my book. I'm happy to be with you.
Thanks. So you've written quite a few books, in low double digits at this point. And in this particular book, to kick it off, let's hear your thoughts about how your view of children and very young adults is different than the mainstream perception of them.
I'm an optimist. I'm very positive about young people. I think that they have incredible capabilities and can do incredible things, particularly in an age when they have so much technology to help them do that. And we have traditionally not let them do that. We've traditionally controlled them and put them in school and let them grow up in terms of being not part of society. And now things are changing. Now they can add value. Now they can contribute at the earliest stages. And that's, for me, extremely exciting.
So when we talk about then the third millennium as a concept in regards to education and young people, how is the third millennium different than the second millennium?
I think humans are evolving. I think that we've gone through a huge change around the year 2000. And that's just convenient that it happened to be around that year. But what's happened is before we were constrained by all the things that we didn't have. We didn't have connection. We didn't have the kind of extensions of our brains that we now have with technology. So we've entered a new era, excuse me. We've entered a new era where young people can be incredibly more powerful than they have in the past, be much more contributing to humanity, and as a result, I think be more happy.
Excellent. So then when we think about education today, what is missing from education today?
There are many things that are missing from education today. Education was fine or was good for the time in which it was created, which was the second millennium, where we didn't have much information. But what's missing today from education are enthusiasm. That's the first thing that's missing. People go to school and they don't really want to be there and they don't really want to learn what we want to teach them. So, hell yes is my term for that, or sign me up. That's what we need as an attitude from our kids. The second thing is low stress, because we are stressing our kids out to the point where some of them are even committing suicide. That's a horrible thing to do to young people. The next thing we need to bring out in the third millennium is all the imagination that's in their heads. That was very difficult to do in the past. You had to get expertise, you had to get technique, you had to spend years doing it. Now we have things like generative AI that can help us bring out the imagination in everyone, and we need it. The next thing is self-knowledge. If you ask kids, what are you passionate about? What do you want to fix? What do you want to create? Often they'll say they don't know. Well, they should know. They should know who they are. At any minute, it might change, and what they're excited about, and what they want to do, and what they want to fix, and what things they want to create in the world. And then the final one, and I think this is almost the most important, is that kids can now do real world accomplishment. They can create things in the real world that realize dreams, that fix problems they care about, that help people they care about. And real world accomplishment is something that has not been part of our education. Our education has been learning in advance so you could accomplish when you were an adult. But now that's going to change incredibly.
Now, in terms of the solutions that are required to reform education to get young people on this track, what are some of the changes that have to occur given the reality of entrenched interest in existing education, the ossified nature of educational institutions they don't want to change? How are some of these solutions going to manifest themselves and what can be done?
There needs to be a big change because now educational institutions focus on learning in advance. They want to put knowledge into kids' heads, and they do that sometimes effectively. But what we need in the third millennium is to bring things out of kids' heads. We need their solutions. So, in order to do that, we need high enthusiasm and low stress and self knowledge and real world accomplishment. So, one of the things I would like to see, and I work with many schools to do this, is a switch over to what I call empowerment hubs. That means that a school is not based on classes where you learn a curriculum in advance. It's based on accomplishing things that add value to the world. So if a school is in a place, that place should be getting better because all the kids are making it better. The families should be getting better, the communities, the schools, the world, the country. Everything should be getting better because the young people are helping make it better. That's a huge change in perspective.
Are schools actually adapting in this direction? And is it only at the school level or is it even at the undergraduate university level? Who is adapting? Who is not adapting? What does it take to get institutions to go along with this type of philosophy?
The adaptation is starting, and it's a long process. I in my book talk about a 20-year time frame. I think it's going to take that long. But there are many schools that are starting to do real world projects. Up till now, we've started mostly with what they call project based learning, which is just another form of learning in advance through projects. But now, real world projects are coming into the world. I'm going tomorrow to a school in St. Louis, Missouri, who wants to do this. There are proto empowerment hubs in schools all over the world. There's a company or an organization, there's an organization called Design for Change out of India that works on these kinds of real world projects in over 70 countries. And you asked about higher ed. More and more higher ed is moving to a project based curriculum where students don't take classes in subjects, but they continuously do real world projects and learn what they need to know while they're doing the projects and in service of doing those projects. And when you learn in service of doing something that you are excited about, that you want to do, that you think is valuable, that's the learning that you remember for the rest of your life.
Indeed, because in academia, for example, now speaking about college, so I studied electrical engineering, and very little of what was taught, and this was a very good school, Case Western Reserve University, very little of what was taught had any relevance to a job that an entry-level person would get after a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering. They didn't teach you anything of relevance there. Everything that was taught was under the attempt to rope more students into a PhD program, into doctoral studies in electrical engineering. Very theoretical, very research oriented, not pragmatic in relation to getting jobs, and very little by way of projects that would be directly relevant to what an employer would have an entry level student do. Now, this was some time ago, but it seemed very disconnected that way. But now, from what you're saying, there's some schools that are going in this direction of project-based learning, and like the one in St. Louis and the other ones that you mentioned. But it seems that the wholesale reform of schools and educational institutions is still a long ways away because everyone has been talking about the education bubble, the K through 12 cost structure, amount of money spent on children versus very poor outcomes, is extremely inefficient, also at the university level. so many students crushing student loan debt for degrees that are of questionable value at best in many cases. So do you see this helping in terms of the cost of education, value per input, both cost and time? And again, is there resistance that you're facing from entrenched interests in education who would like things to stay as they are and oppose effectively what you are trying to evangelize?
Yes, there's resistance. Education, as it is, as we did it in the second millennium, is worldwide and it employs millions of people and it involves them. So the change is going to take a while. But I think more and more people in education, teachers and administrators, are realizing that what we did in the past no longer works for the future. And employers are realizing this as well, because just because you come out with a degree in electrical engineering or whatever doesn't mean you're prepared for work. What employers would much prefer, I think, is to have you show up with a resume of all the real world projects that you have gotten done and show them that you can accomplish, that you can add value, that you can have these real results. And one more thing, I want to distinguish here carefully between project based learning, which really is something that results typically in a report or in a presentation, and real world accomplishment, which is something that actually adds value to the world and that you can measure in before and after. So when a young person does a project with a team, they should be able to point to something in the world and say, see that? Before, it wasn't very good or it didn't exist. And now, because of what I and my team did, it's so much better, as you can see.
Yes, that would indeed be a whole roster of tangible accomplishments that they could point to and thereby demonstrate suitability for employment, because this whole degree and then doing an interview and then the employer is going in sight unseen hoping that, well, this person has a good degree and had a good GPA would somehow correlate to their performance in the corporate setting, when of course there's going to be a pretty low correlation on that front. I've seen extremes in both directions. Your GPA in subjects that have nothing to do with the day-to-day work in the corporation as a presumption of how well they would do. Now, getting back to this concept of the third millennium being different from the second millennium, for those who haven't quite understood what you have said thus far, how would you characterize the third millennium in relation to the second millennium?
I would say that it's going to be a time of incredible change, and it's going to be a time of very rapid, what many people call now exponential change. And the reason for that is because our technology has gotten to the point, human technology has gotten to the point where what we call compute power is now doubling every, sometimes every couple of years, sometimes every couple of months. This is all the advance that's happening in AI and in computing in general. And our whole civilization is now depending on this technology, which is growing at such a pace that the young people of today already have in their pockets a supercomputer from 20 years ago. And they will have, by the time they enter the workforce, many of them, a billion times more powerful additions to their person, and even up to a trillion times. So we're getting different people. We're evolving. And that's why the third millennium is going to be so different.
Yes, this merger of humans with technology is often talked about in a lot of circles. Almost every discussion of futurism has some aspect of that, whether it is a physical merger or even just a cognitive merger through complete and total usage of various tools, including the smartphone, for everything one does. Humans nowadays would seem superhuman to people just a century ago. obviously, just because of the tools one has at one's disposal.
But here's
Now,
an issue. Let me inject something here, if you don't mind. The issue is that we are evolving intellectually. We are evolving in terms of the things that we can do, but we're not. Humans are not evolving emotionally or affectively. We still have the same kind of emotions. We're still the same emotional people, more or less, as we were 100,000 years ago. We don't have enough of what I call Lego, love, empathy, gratitude, optimism, and we have too much of what I call GRABB, greed, racism, abuse, belligerence, and bullying. And that is really becoming, I call it the intellectual emotional gap. It's getting in our way, and we have to do something about it. We have to do something about it in the third millennium, and I think we can.
indeed, because another big dimension of all discussions around futurism, including about technological singularities and superhuman intelligence, there's no doubt that humans are getting more intelligent due to better tools. But because of the GRABB issues that you mentioned, it comes to the question of, well, ultimately, we're going to be superseded by something better than us because too many humans are still mired in GRABB type behaviors that lead to humans perhaps not being good enough to go to the next level. And that is a very open question. And here's
It
to
is.
hoping that humans can actually diminish down the GRABB tendencies, or at least create enough technologies to make GRABB hard to do, the other solution.
I
And
hope so. I hope so. I really do, and again, I'm very optimistic about this. We've always tried to improve humans, and humans have been evolving non-biologically in the last 100,000 years. We've evolved speech. We've tamed fire for cooking and for other things. We have done agriculture. We've gotten social organization. We've tamed animals. We have created writing and print. We have created morality. These are all evolutions of humans. And more recently, in our times, we've created digital technologies. And even more recently, we've started to bring forth what we call artificial intelligence, which I call missing intelligence up till now. So we continue to evolve in the intellectual side, and now we have to do something to evolve in the emotional side. And because we have tools like CRISPR and like other things, we can now start to do this in ways that are not destructive. Nobody liked it when we were trying to make the right people by killing off the wrong people. That's not the way to go. What we can now do is the same kind of thing we do to eliminate disease. We can say, okay, if we just change this small thing, we get much better people from everybody's perspective, not from the perspective of one nationality or another nationality or one race or another race, from everybody's perspective. Everyone wants people who have more love, empathy, gratitude, and optimism. So let's see if we can get those.
absolutely. But then how do we prevent the wrong people from being the ones who decide what traits should be taken out? Two examples that we see pervasively in the world today is some people may want to eradicate the beliefs that other people have that are on the other side of the political spectrum because that is seen as a genetic defect of the other side, number one. And we also see groups of people, and unfortunately rather large groups of people, who will say things like masculinity in and of itself is bad and needs to be eradicated through CRISPR type tools and things like that, which I think is a terrible, terrible idea. But there are a lot of people who think it's fashionable to say something like that. So how do we prevent megalomaniacal people who have perhaps a different value system, who want to eradicate these things that need not be eradicated?
It's tricky and it's fraught. And it's going to be very difficult. It's going to take time. That's why I have this 20-year time horizon, and it may take more than that. But my perspective is that I'm an optimist, and I think humans really know what's good and want to be better. And I think that we will eventually work it out, as we always have. And that's why I call it an evolution. What works best for everybody is what will prevail. And we're going to see things right now. We're seeing in the world a return to grab in politics and in a lot of ways. And there will always be people who have their own agendas. One of my basics for the future is the ability to compromise. And if we don't have that, we're going to have a lot of trouble.
So another thing that you've mentioned in your book is how expertise, or what is understood as expertise today, is greatly diminishing in importance. And could you elaborate more about what you mean by that and how people should not necessarily pursue specialized expertise in the traditional sense?
Sure. In the past, things didn't change much or didn't change very quickly. So, what you had experienced and learned in your lifetime was something that you could pass on to the next generation. That's what we meant by expertise. You had seen a lot of things. You wanted the older doctor who had seen more cases than the younger doctor. Well, it turns out that that is still true in emotional sense. Because people are not changing much emotionally, the emotional wisdom from the past, from all of our past, is probably in many cases still true. That's why we can still be interested in Shakespeare and other things like that. And he shows us about how humans are, and we're still that way. But when it comes to the intellectual stuff, when it comes to all the new stuff that's being invented and being done in new ways, and all the new ways we are organizing and creating given the technologies that we have, what people knew how to do in the past is just not going to be relevant for the future. Some of it may, but much of it, if you say, well, all my experience tells me that we should do this, you might be very wrong because it's such a different world.
Okay, so this also seems to have some degree of, let's say, advanced society assumptions around it when, of course, we're dealing with the whole world. And you've actually spent time in India, one of the few non-Indians who has done that and spent a lot of time there. But from my experiences in a poorer country like that, the moral evolution is still quite some time behind, and behaving in a grab sense is still not only seen as normal, but almost seen as socially prestigious. The better you are at doing grab, the more successful you'll be. And cunning is what is considered smart, and taking advantage of people is what is considered resourcefulness. And this is a very high population society, and not just India, but countries neighboring India, and true of many poorer countries in the world. So when places like this are decades or even centuries behind in moral evolution, or even getting to the point where grab is considered undesirable and wrong by the average person, and I can tell you it's not there yet. How does that vast distance get covered, even in a world of exponential change and rapid technological advancement, to get to this much better future that you are envisioning and are optimistic about?
Well, that's why I wrote a book called Third Millennium Kids. My hope, and it is perhaps more of a hope than I something I can document, but when I see kids around the world, I think they're different. I think they're changing. I think they're seeing so many of the ways that we have messed up the planet. I see they're seeing what the United Nations calls its sustainable goals. And those things are really, from their point of view, our generation's epic fails. We have really failed in a lot of ways. They are nowhere near as well off in every sense as they could be and should be. And I think they are starting to realize that. And the second thing that will take a little more time is I think they are starting to realize that they have the power to change that. And that my favorite example is Greta Thunberg. So take a Greta Thunberg, who was a young person who said climate is really, the adults are not doing enough about this problem and climate change. And so she started out doing things that we did in the second millennium. She demonstrated in the rain in front of Parliament, and she spoke at the United Nations, and she spoke at the World Economic Forum, and she didn't really see much change. So then she started turning to some third millennium methods. She started organizing the strikes in the various cities that she calls Fridays for Future. And those are good, but they're very small and they're local and they're infrequent. Now, here's the power that Greta has as a third millennium person. She could ask every young person in the world, every kid in the world, and she can connect with almost all of them through the media. There are more than 5 billion phones in the world now. She could ask them all to not go to school until something meaningful happened around climate change. Just don't go. Now, not everybody would agree to that, but a lot of them would. And think of the chaos that that would cause among the adult generation. So suddenly, our young people, as a planetary force, has power to make changes. And I think that as this realization comes to the generations that are now starting out in the third millennium, I think we will see very rapid and very extensive change.
Okay. Now, there's an acronym called MESS, MESS, in your book, and you describe that as something that is no longer necessary because we have graduated past the difficulties of what MESS represents. So could you explain a bit more about that?
Sure. The acronym is the MESS, MESS, which stands for Math, English, Science, and Social Studies. And that, with the exception of changing the language depending on where you are, that is the curriculum of the entire world. The entire world teaches math, English or local language, science, and social studies. And it starts at the very beginning and it goes through an entire curriculum of doing that. Well, that was very useful in the second millennium because we didn't have access to information. We didn't even have access to teachers in many places. So it was useful to put people into classrooms, batch process them, and teach everybody the same mess curriculum. That is no longer necessary because everything in the mess is now in your pocket if you have a smartphone. And the trick is knowing when you need it and when to use it. Well, that's becoming easier and easier because when you want to accomplish, which is when you need this information, when you want to get something done, you can figure out what of the mess you need. It's not that the mess is not good stuff. It's only good stuff for certain people at certain times. And so now we have ways not only to have it with us at all time, all of it, but to say, when do I need this? We have YouTube to tell you how to do almost anything. We have AI to tell you what you need to do something, get something done. So we're moving into a period where learning the mess in advance is no longer necessary. It's not that the specific content of the mess isn't necessary for some people at some times. It is. But learning the whole mess in advance as much as we do is very outdated.
Indeed, because a lot of people don't realize that this whole classroom-based model of schooling, known as the Prussian model, that's P Russia, after that it was a part of the German Empire, is from the mid to late 19th century, 1850s and 60s, and it was designed to get factory workers trained on just a few basic things: how to show up on time, how to schedule periods of the day, that's why there's a bell between the periods, and to achieve basic literacy and become obedient to the teacher. This is why that model was created. Now, 160 plus years later, that is quite outdated because these things, while showing up on time and such is important as well, to go to an institution to learn these things in a period-based model is very, very odd. And when you think of something like the mess, we are told that children, let's say sixth grade children, 11 years old, they'll have to progress at the same rate in mathematics, reading, spelling, science, and everything. What if someone is 2 years ahead in something and 2 years behind in another, and they're told that they're wrong? And I always thought that people in the future would find it very odd that we had this type of one-size-fits-all type of institutional learning where you have to advance in all the subjects at the same rate. And the only thing you have in common with other people who are advancing at different rates is that you're the same age as them and nothing else. It's very, very odd. When you talk about schooling, so someone of my age, when I was in school, I was very good at three things that were given a lot of importance when I was in school and are obsolete today. One of which was being able to do all the long division and pen and paper mathematical calculations on a piece of paper for exams. I would argue young people don't need to learn how to do long division anymore at all because everyone has a calculator in their phone. But I was very good at that. I was very good at grammar and spelling, which also you don't need to be good at in your own head for the reasons that you mentioned, because everything's on the computer. It's desirable to be good at that, but you really don't have to because it can be offloaded into the computer. And my cursive handwriting was very good, partly due to my long fingers. And that is also of no value at all anymore because nobody writes anything anymore. I mean, some people ask me to write on their gift cards every now and then, but that's very, very infrequent. So having good cursive handwriting became utterly obsolete. But when I was a child, all three of these things were considered extremely important, not only in school, but even to the whole worth of the child in terms of how adults treated them. You're a good kid if you do well in school, and doing well in school meant being good at these three things. Your entire value of personhood was somehow correlated to these three things that no longer matter. And in retrospect, it's very strange. And I guess this process is accelerating further because, as you rightly point out, that mess can be offloaded and someone doesn't have to spend years of time learning things that they can access at their fingertips at will.
And here's the point. It's not that we don't want to be very capable people. We want to be more capable people. We want to be able to do these things. But now we are becoming what I call symbiotic human hybrids with our machines. So today, if you want to have good handwriting, you can actually invent your own font. It's very easy to make one that looks like your handwriting, and you can say anything and you can speak it and have a paper come out written in your handwriting, just like you can say something and now have it come out in any language. You can do that in voice. You can do that in writing. It's a very different time. So we're trying to figure out what are as we become these hybrid people, what are the parts that our internal wetware brain does better? And what are the parts that we're much better off delegating to what is still part of us, but is technology based? And that's something we're going through. And that's going to be one of the huge struggles and questions of the early third millennium. How do we function as better humans being symbiotic with our technology?
So then, in a concept of what the basics even are anymore, what would you define as the basics that people do have to learn as opposed to what was assumed to be the basics under the mess era and prior?
Well, we don't have to do what we did before. Before, the basics were considered what we call in English the three R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic, followed by the mess. And that's what they teach pretty much everywhere in the world. But now I think the basics are things like real world accomplishment. You can start when you're as young as 3, and we have examples, and we have tens of thousands of examples of young people doing real world accomplishment and adding value to the world. That needs to be a basic. Another basic we need is to be able to get to the essence of things. And if there's a truth to be found, to find that truth. We need to be able to compromise with each other and to get along with each other. That's a huge basic. We also need to be able to adapt. because things are changing so fast, so quickly, that we'd better learn to adapt. What we do this year is not necessarily what we're going to do next year. That's one of the reasons why teaching is having such a problem, because they do the same thing year after year over and over again. The next thing is this idea of Lego and grab, that we want more Lego, love, empathy, gratitude, optimism. And I would add what my friend Esther Wojcicki calls trick: trust, respect, independence, collaboration, and kindness. We need to get more of those and less of what you keep referring to is rightly as the grab: greed, racism, abuse, belligerence, bullying. We need much less of those. So that's yet another basic is self-education, because it was assumed in the second millennium that you had to show up at a classroom and let somebody else educate you. Well, that's not true anymore. What you can do, if you know who you are and what you like and what you care about at any moment, not that it won't change, it will change, but at any moment, you can use the technology that you have to self-educate. And millions of people, both young and old, are doing this around the world. The way they do this a lot of the time today is through YouTube. And that gives you a choice of incredible, no matter what you want to learn, you probably have several teachers who are offering to teach it to you. There's another one, which is because we were never connected in the past, we could be very combative. We could say, well, we're going to do this and we're going to do this, and I don't care what it means for you. And today we're discovering that is the case for climate change, where some people say, well, we're going to still burn coal, even though we know this kind of thing because it benefits us. What we need to do is think of ourselves as earthlings. Earthlings is a term that came out of science fiction when the Earth was attacked by other planets. But basically, it means we need to consider ourselves first as citizens of the world before our affiliation with our country or our beliefs or our religion or anything else. We have to all be citizens of the world, earthlings. And the final basic is that we need to become symbiotic human hybrids with our technology. We can't think of ourselves anymore as saying, oh, wouldn't it be better if we just turned off all the technology and went back to how great humans were in the past? First, we can't do that. And second, we wouldn't want to do that. What we have to do is learn to live with these technologies as part of us and make them a positive part of us. It's as almost as if we've grown a new body part, a new tail, and we don't know how to use it properly yet, but we're going to figure that out, and we have to figure that out if we're going to advance as a human species.
Absolutely. But the question that comes up, and a lot of futurists rightly get this type of pushback, and I believe this is under discussed in futurism, is all that's well and good, but there are some people who are just evil. They either have no empathy for others or they get pleasure out of evil deeds. And in general, bad guys do use technology. So under a paradigm of moving people away from grab and towards Lego, how does one shepherd people into that and reduce the proportion of people who are actually evil? Because there is often not enough discussion about that within a techno-optimistic future.
Well, until we change human nature, and we're going to be changing human nature, there will always be the grabby people. And we've had to fight world wars against them. We've had to mobilize and do this. We put a lot of them in our jails. We really have a justice system that tries to eliminate that. And there are only two things that will eliminate that. One is that if young people grow up with a different attitude about what's right, and I think that's happening in a lot of ways. I think people are seeing the old justice system is not any good, that they're seeing property and privacy and many of the things that they were seen one way in the second millennium, I think they're being seen differently in the third millennium, and that will take some time. But as I look at young people around the world, and I'm off to China tomorrow, I see this happening. The second thing is that we have to try to make it not as useful for people to do these things. And that's part of understanding that if we're being manipulated, we are being manipulated. Understanding that this is something that is going on into us that we don't want. If we are young people and the games makers are making games that do things to us that are not good, then they should make different games. We should ask them to be making better games or better technology. And something we're just at the very beginning of, is figuring out how to use all the technology and power that we have for good. And we just have, because so many people use it for greed and for making money and for getting their own way, we haven't figured that out yet. But we're going to figure that out. We have a lot more people, I think, that want Lego than people that want greed in the world and grab in the world. And so this is a process that we're going to go through over first the next 20 years, but probably through the entire third millennium and the reason we need to do that is because humans always want to advance. They always want to advance and they always want to get better. And I think almost everybody knows what better is, even though we may disagree at the margins.
Okay, now you did say that tomorrow you're going to St. Louis, and then you said tomorrow you're going to China.
Well, I'm
Some
going to
viewers might
China
guess
later in
that.
the week.
Okay,
I'm going tomorrow to St. Louis
yeah.
and for a day, and I'm going to be at a school there that's a very forward-thinking school and talk to the faculty. And then I come back and I go off to China where I'm going to be speaking at an education conference and trying to help them understand that it's not doing the mess with more technology that we need. A lot of people in the world think that what we need is just to keep doing the mess, but add more technology, make it easier, make it more differentiated. And that's not what we need. What we need is to figure out what each person needs and has high enthusiasm about, and then help them do those things with not excessive stress.
Okay. Now that brings up another complication. So I saw a podcast with Scott Galloway that was posted just recently, and he says something somewhat the opposite in that don't follow your dreams because most young people's dreams are improbable or mathematically difficult to achieve. Extremely few people will be able to earn a living as a musician or actor or pro athlete or even social media influencer versus become a corporate attorney or an investment banker or an accountant and so forth. So while we are achieving greater economic complexification where more aspirations can be pursued, remember in the old days, there are only 4 professions available for men and maybe 2 available for women, and that's it. You had to be good at one of those 4, and your choices were very limited. And if you're a high IQ person who was not wealthy, too bad, your intellect went to waste. But he does point out a valid concern, which is that things that are glamorous and fun do not cater to the number of people who want to do them. Therefore, one has to be realistic about, okay, you're going to have to become a tax attorney or an accountant or a computer programmer or something like that. So within this greater aspirational approach to education and ability for higher specialization and self-actualization, where does the balance come in and how do you see that reconciling itself?
The place where I would disagree with Scott is that it's not that you have to follow your whatever the specific passion you may have at the time. You just need to be doing something and find something that you are excited about, that you say hell yes to. A great example is that if you, when I used to live in New York, teachers would talk to kids and they would say, "What's your passion?" And who do you want to be? And the kids would say, "I want to be Steph Curry, or I want to be a famous singer, or I want to be Taylor Swift." And then the teacher would then say, "Well, the likelihood of that is almost zero. So, you better have a plan B. You better have a backup." And what I say to those kids is, let's probe a little deeper. Why do you want to be Steph Curry? Do you want to be Steph Curry because he's a great athlete and a great basketball player? At which point, practice your butt off because that's what he did and that's how he got there. Do you want to be Steph Curry because he's rich and famous and can do all these things? Well, if that's what you want, I recommend you go to business school. I recommend that you do something that will get you that goal. And if what you sound telling me you really want to be associated with basketball, well, guess what? On a professional basketball team, there are 300 people, only 12 of whom play basketball. There are trainers, there are agents, there are everything that you could possibly imagine. So no matter what you're good at and what you like to do, if being part of basketball or music or anything else is really your agenda, you can figure out a way to do that that both works for you and gives you a hell yes attitude and helps other people at the same time. And that's what we should be struggling for.
Now, that also leads us to another question of how much technological access should children have? Should they have a smartphone? And if so, at what age? And should the hardware and software producers of smartphone components have child-specific smartphones that allow certain access and not others, and can be upgraded as the child gets a few years older because someone upgrades their phone every 3 or 4 years anyway? So there are a lot of complicated decisions to be made by parents in terms of whether their child should have that type of technological access and their own device. So what are your thoughts about that?
Well, there are many possible solutions, and if they have to be individual. I don't want my child or anybody's child to be raised statistically. If the statistics say this is going to happen, 20% of the people are depressed or suicidal or whatever, then I won't give you the phone. No. You have to know who your young person is. And the biggest thing that we don't do today is get to know our young people. We just treat them as if they're kids and we never have the conversations. So the very first thing I would say is, yes, you can have a phone whenever you want it, if, and I am a big fan of not saying no to anybody, but saying yes, if. You can have it if you keep me very informed about how you're feeling about using this phone. If you're feeling bullied, if you're feeling bad about it, if you're feeling all these things, we need to know about this. We need to discuss this. But on the other hand, you are a person who was born in and is living in the third millennium. And having technology as part of you that extends you, that does positive things for you, is your birthright. And so I would not take away the technology. I would just work to make the technology work better for every person at every age.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about why change is so hard, but I want to drill a little more into this because educational institutions have perverse incentives these days. There are a lot of people with very easy bureaucratic level jobs in university. That's why tuition is so high, because these people have infested and multiplied in universities to the extent that the average large university has a couple of thousand extra bureaucrats doing things that were not being done even in the 1980s. And those people are very redundant, and this has continued to inflate the cost of universities. The same in the school system. The most powerful lobby of all in the United States is not even the military industrial complex or big pharma or anything like that. It is the schools union, teachers, superintendents, administrative bureaucrats in schools, because that is a massive tool of government within society and organization of people and a powerful political lobby and force within the political landscape. So given how hard change is, how do you see change occurring and with a real effect of getting educated for modern workforce needs, enlightenment needs, self-actualization needs, should in fact be a lot cheaper once we reform or bypass or do away with or diminish the existing cost structures. So yeah, a lot of questions within there, but how do you think change can occur and where will it be the hardest?
Yeah, I don't blame any of the people in the system. They went into a system that existed, and most of them went into it because they want to help kids. And that's a great thing. What's changed is the environment and how to help kids. And so if you continue to think you can help kids by putting them through a system based on the mess and giving them degrees and getting them to that point and charging them whatever it costs to get there, that's just not helping kids very much. And what we're discovering these days is you can get a college degree if that's what your employer wants in many ways, and you can do it online and you can do it in other ways. It doesn't matter even anymore which school you go to, except at the very, very top. So what's changing is what the actual job is. And when I talk to teachers, I say, look, if you think your job, and most of them do because they're told this is their job, is to cover the curriculum that's in the textbook. That's what teachers are told to do. You have to cover the curriculum that's in the textbook, lecture on each chapter every day or however you do it. And that's your job. And then you have to get good scores on tests for the kids having that stuff in their head. If you think that that's the job that kids need these days, then you're wrong. It's not. And if that's what you're doing for a living, then you might want to rethink that. You might want to think, well, am I still making buggy whips? Am I still making buggy whips in the time of electric cars and jet planes and all this kind of stuff? And I think that most educators have an idea that what they're doing is not up to date. It's not right. They don't know how to change it yet. They are very focused. Oh, well, if we only changed the curriculum a little, if we only got rid of a few of administrative personnel, that would fix the thing. It won't. What has to happen is we have to rethink what kids need to succeed in the third millennium. And what they need is high enthusiasm, lower stress, more self-knowledge, more imagination, and much more real-world accomplishment. And if we realize that, we'll start doing that. And that's why some of these schools are already starting to do that. When kids go through this stuff, when kids do real-world projects that they're really proud of, that they've chosen themselves, not that they were assigned to, but that they've chosen themselves. And when kids can point to something and say, see that? It's so much better. Then they get excited. They come home, their parents get excited, and that's what's going to eventually produce the change. And it's going to be a very big generational change. It's going to take time because there are going to be people who continue doing what they have done successfully for many years. But it can't be what goes on for the future, because if it is, our kids will be woefully underprepared.
And that leads to another question. Will the number of teachers, educators, whatever we want to call them, will that be proportionally the same in society as before? Or will it be a lot less because under YouTube, someone might make very good educational videos, which millions of people can watch, and that's great for the creator of those videos, but then millions of people are getting educated from that video, so there's far less need for teachers. So how do you see the future of even the educator profession, and will there be a need for that many people earning a living as what could be considered educators anymore?
I think there's always a need for people who want to help kids. And I think young people need adults' help. But the idea of what teaching has been up till now. What the idea that you become a teacher because you want to stand up in front of a class and cover this curriculum, that is going to be outmoded. And I think it's going to disappear in a generation. It'll be a lot of resistance, perhaps, to its disappearing, but many things have disappeared, like teaching Latin and Greek to everybody, like teaching the multiplication tables up to the 20s and beyond that, by teaching everybody to memorize logarithmic tables. All those things we've dropped, we've stopped doing, because we realized finally that while they were okay in and of themselves, they were not useful for the future. So what I see happening is we are going to evolve all sorts of new ways for these people who want to help young people to be effective and add value. If you can help, the greatest gift that a young person, any young person, can get in the world is an adult who sees them as they see themselves and says, "Oh, why don't you try this? This might be good. You'd love this." And that is something that we don't put a lot of emphasis on. We have the ratio of guidance counselors, for example, to students in California is 900 to 1. It's absolutely out of focus. It's focused the wrong way. It's focused on doing something, teaching knowledge that is no longer needed because the knowledge is in the kid's pocket. It needs to be focused on helping the kids. And there are lots of issues because all the adults today grew up in the second millennium and they're not 100% sure of what to do, and we have to help them. But if they really pay attention to wanting to help the kids succeed in their future, we can do that. And my new book, Third Millennium Kids, is a guide for everyone. I call it a hell yes, low stress guide for everyone. So I recommend that people at least take a look at it.
So it sounds like learning how to learn is going to be a bigger aspect of all education, because that's not a new concept per se, but it was reserved for higher education at the topmost institutions. And the greatest superpower, it was said, was if you can learn how to learn, then you can do anything. You may not know about a subject today, but if you know where to go to learn about it and can become an expert in a weekend and give a lecture, even though you didn't know anything about it 3 days ago, then you're unbeatable because you have learned how to learn. So under everything you've spoken about, is learning how to learn going to become not only more important and more widespread, but it will be an unspoken truth. It will be assumed that that is not only the end game, but that most people have become good at that under the third millennium.
I've never liked that formulation. I think that we all know how to learn, and there we can get better at it. But the thing that's missing is the desire to be able to do something, the desire to accomplish something. When you want to accomplish something that's your own, that comes from inside you, you learn whatever you need to do that. People learn whole languages if they have to do that to get to where they want to get to. That's not the problem. Learning to learn is not the problem. The problem is learning to accomplish. The problem is figuring out what it is that you want to do that motivates you, that is useful in the world, that you can go do. And once you know that, you will learn in a million ways. That is not the problem of learning to learn, in my view.
We've talked about this in a decentralized way, and how there'll be enough people who want to help students learn at all ages, children, young adults, university level. Do you feel there is going to be some degree of hybrid model or even encroachment of employers taking younger people instead of going to college and just having them be project based and all that, because they're more amenable to an apprenticeship model, a project based sequence model, and just taking smart kids who graduate high school, telling them to not bother with the formal university education where they have to pay, versus join this big tech company where they have this elaborate program of projects that is much closer to what you have described as a third millennium style of learning, and they would actually get some nominal salary. Do you believe that type of model might be something that springs forth as a mechanism of change given the resistant nature of educational institutions?
I do, and it's already happening. And we are seeing a rise in apprenticeships, but they're not becoming the what we need yet, and they will. We need, just like baseball teams or sports teams need a farm team, they need to start finding young people when they're young and who are very enthusiastic about what this is and helping prepare them. The businesses should be doing the same thing. What's changing is that young people can add value, so that businesses can now find somebody to do work for them who is much younger than it ever was the case before. And we've started to see this as companies needed websites and companies need now AI. It's the young people who know about this stuff. And so if we find the ways of setting this up that's not exploitative of the young people, we don't want kids working in diamond mines or as chimney sweeps. But what we want is to bring out the value adding power and the excitement and the energy and the enthusiasm of all these young people and put it to useful things in the world. And the way we do that today is mostly through companies. So companies ought to be thinking about what young people can contribute to their companies. It will be better for the companies. They will get probably lower cost labor, maybe not free, but they will get this. And there are some schools that are doing this. High Tech High, for example, which has a lot of high tech equipment and CNC equipment. It sells services to companies. The idea that young people can do nothing of value until they grow up and have gone to school for 20 years or 12 years, whatever, however many years it is. That's an old second millennium idea. And remember, most businesses are run by second millennium people. So this is going to take time. But that is what's coming, is that we can put our entire workforce to use. And in some ways, it's very similar to what went on with women, because for a long time we said, well, women are very nice, but we're not going to let them work in business, or we're not going to let them have certain roles, or we're going to limit them to the household, or do whatever it is. And that is starting to change big time in our times. It has already changed in most places, not all, but most places, that women can add value and contribute in the same way as men can. Well, now you can turn that on its side and say, well, roughly half the world is young, and those people are being left out and being excluded. And it is time we figured out how to include them in ways that are not just age appropriate, but appropriate to each one of them. And that's something we couldn't do before, but now we can.
Indeed, because there's two things that should be relatively obvious, but institutional resistance and slowness, as we have discussed, has been the problem. One is that the big tech companies, whether Google, Nvidia, Apple, or the Elon Musk companies, I'm surprised they don't already have a program of just taking the very smartest 18-year-olds, telling them, don't go to college, we'll put you in this rotational program. They're in their cohort with their peers, they can even have a dormitory and all that. And they are exposed to the various corporate functions and allowed to get a lot of experience, leeway for experimentation, encouraged to fail and experience everything there. And they're getting paid some low salary, fine, but that is still getting paid versus accumulating debt. Okay, because the alternative is not to get paid more. The alternative is to accrue a lot of university debt, which is crushing and non-dischargeable, and all the other problems we know from this higher ed crisis and debt problem that is going on. And by 4 years in, they will have learned much, much more that is relevant to the actual workplace just by being in that company, being in Apple, Nvidia, any of the Elon Musk companies, and being in this rotational apprenticeship slash training program versus a university. So that is one thing that I'm surprised has not already occurred, and it should occur, but it would make a lot of sense because the smartest people are the ones who actually don't need college. They can go directly to add some value to a tech company like that if the program is structured well. The second paradigm that people don't think about is under the existing model to turn a human being into someone who is productive economically took 16 to 25 years, and for the higher paying professions, obviously the latter side of that range. Whereas AI is productive immediately and makes copies of itself immediately. So for this discussion of AI outcompeting humans for jobs, if you have a paradigm where the human can only be a contributor by the time they're 25 years old, that is way too slow to be competitive with these needs. And therefore, this contribution happening at an earlier age, under everything you've explained, is a necessity versus this whole notion that you have to spend 25 years to get to the point after birth where you can actually be in the workforce. And then AI is there to outcompete you because AI did not need 25 years to do that.
I fully agree. And what we didn't accept in the past is that young people could add value. And now they can. And they have to learn to do it in symbiosis with AI, because that's part of life. It's not we're competing with AI, it's that AI is a new part of us. And it's really important. And I want to do everything that I can to help young people understand from the very earliest times in their life that they can do much more. Now, if they want to write a picture book, they can write a picture book. Now, if they want to make something, and it's so important. I advocate for empowerment hubs inside companies. And it's not important that somebody come into a company and be exposed to everything. It's important that the companies find the young people who are enthusiastic about what they do overall. So SpaceX is about going to space. Well, if somebody's excited about going to space, they should be considering SpaceX. Other companies are about making chemicals. Other companies are about making people healthier. Other companies are about many things. So first thing is, okay, I'm kind of interested in that. I'll go there. Within that, they have to figure out, both the company and the young person, what the young person really loves to do, what will make them get up every day, go to work, solve a problem, make something new, invent something that will be of use to that company and through that company to the world. And the payment thing needs to be arranged, because you're absolutely right. There's no reason why you should have to go into debt. And worse, when you started a company, you start at the very bottom because you really know very little about how that company works and what's needed. So the system is set up for a different time. It's not that it's wrong in general, was ever wrong. It's wrong for now. And now we have to rethink it. And that's why I'm talking about third millennium kids, and you're talking about third millennium economics. And it's the third millennium is just a different time in human existence and history. And we need to figure out how to make it work for everybody. The most important thing, I guess, is that I would say is that we need to understand young people as individuals and as extremely powerful individuals. And we need to help guide them. And because they're in some ways more powerful than we are, because we didn't grow up with all these things as parts of us. We didn't grow up with AI as a part of us. We didn't grow up with 3D worlds as a part of us. That we can't always guide them, but what we can do is see what they're enthusiastic about and help them by promoting their own enthusiasm, taking the stress off of them to do what we think they should do. And if we did that, if we took, I think every kid has dreams. Every kid is enthusiastic about something, and almost every kid is positive. So if we did that, if we learn how to do that in new ways that are appropriate for the third millennium, we will go much further because we'll be putting all of our people to work.
Absolutely. And it seems we're only scratching the surface of what's possible, because everything you're talking about will be understood and enthusiastically received by the topmost tier of people in advanced economy countries, but that's a very small percentage of the world. In poorer countries, and even the educated people of poorer countries, like in India, it's still far from that. It's very brutal in that a child has to do well in a very rigid system that is memorization based and get high scores on exams. India is still a place where if a kid has dyslexia, parents don't accept that and they beat the kid for not doing well in school. They'll say, this kid seems smart verbally, but he does badly in exams. So corporal punishment is a very common thing, and that's very sad, but that does happen all the time. The neighbors can hear that the parents clobbering the child for doing poorly in the exam. And forget the opinions of even just children under 18, that goes even further. It's a cultural reality in places like that where the opinion of a 25-year-old is considered to be of no value to the 50-year-old, in that wisdom and knowledge is seen as 100% correlated to calendar time on this earth. And the extent to which the opinion of the 30-year-old is dismissed and completely ignored by the 55-year-old is surprising and very, very outdated, of course, but that is the reality in this very large population pool and probably a lot of other emerging countries that are poorer and less advanced in terms of cognitive complexity, moral evolution, economic complexity, innovation, things like that.
And there's a reason for that. The reason is that in the past, things didn't change. So that if you learned from experience, that experience-based learning was valuable and you could pass it on. What's different now is we're in a very different time, and the whole world is in that, even though some places are coming to it more slowly than others. And India is going to go through enormous changes in the coming decades. It already is. Now that everybody in India has a digital identity, now that everybody in India has a digital bank account, we're going to start seeing enormous changes. I just think we have to have a more positive attitude towards the young people, because I think even if you went into the most horrible places, conditions that exist, like a refugee camp, and we have far too many of those, and you got all the young people together, and you said to them, it's your job to make this place a lot better. And our job is to help you and give you the tools and find out who wants to do what and who's interested in helping the health system and who's interested in helping the housing and who's interested in doing this. And if you guys organize, you have the power to do this. I don't think you'd get resistance to that. I think you'd get a lot of enthusiastic kids.
Excellent, and a very optimistic view of the future, and inspiring to know that all of this is within reach, because to a lot of people this would seem that it's very far away, but as per everything you have explained very well, it need not be as far away in calendar time as anyone thinks.
Absolutely. And the evidence for that is the tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of projects that young people have done around the world to help their communities, to help others, to invent new things, to figure out ways of adding value. And that is something that is going to be very different in the third millennium. Young people adding value and doing it in ways they love.
Excellent. Now, on that note, this has been a very, very inspiring and informative discussion. And I encourage that everyone who is interested by everything they heard in this podcast get a copy of Marc's book, which can be ordered in the Amazon link in the description box below this video. And Marc, thank you very much for making the time to discuss all of this with us and share your lifetime of experience in these matters as someone who is tapped as an expert to speak at these conferences and to guide educational institutions and groups in these matters. So very inspiring to hear about.
My pleasure.